Hi guys, welcome on channel Sharing with People. So far we've discussed the basics of two flow inside N8N that we want to describe in detail, and these two are actually about generating videos from music and then automatically generating stories and all the asset regarding that stories like pictures, videos and so on, and then building fully automatically the story. We also covered my N8N automation, which I created to describe, subtitle and translate the YouTube videos. Then we saw the tools and software that I use. So the last bit before we jump on detailed description of the flows is the computer that I'm using to actually run these two flows or my flows in general. So with that said, without unnecessary bravado, let's jump in. So given that I was building my PC when the newer chipset for Ryzen CPUs was not available, then the best available during that time was X670E, which has PCI Express port on PCI Express version 5. So I was planning to actually jump on Blackwell architecture of GPUs, but during the time Ryzen has been just released, and so the 670E was the best available. The motherboard itself looks like this, so you can put into it 4 NVMe drives, and then you have 3 16 PCI Express slots, which means you can put there 3 GPUs. In reality, the first one is connected through 16 PCI Express lines up to PCI Express version 5. Then you have this PCI Express 4 version 4 times, and then this one is connected usually 2 to 4 times based on if you actually put in place the NVMe drive. Good. So we've described the motherboard, then obviously I believe there is M5 socket, which means you can put there Ryzen. Why Ryzen we will learn in a while, and then you can put DDR5 memory. Usually you want to use just 2 of them, because in consumer grade hardware the CPU has only 2 channel driver. So if you put more of them, it may be quite difficult to overclock the RAM to run stable on overclocked frequencies. So let's move on the CPU. So when I was buying it, the best CPU available with reasonable price was new Zen 5 Ryzen 9950X. What is actually very interesting about this CPU is amount of PCI Express lines, which means to how many peripherals it can be connected directly. So in case of Ryzen 9, you have usable 24 PCI Express 5 lines, and the reason why there is mentioned, let me make it bigger, why there is mentioned 28 is because the 4 are used to connect the CPU together with the chipset X670E, and then these 24 you can use. In case of X7060E, which is another 12 Gen E PCI Express, so if the chipset can interconnect the peripherals directly, it will do it, but otherwise the chipset and the CPU are connected only directly through 4 PCI Express lines of PCI Express 4 version, and then the CPU itself is usually connected through 16 PCI Express line to PCI Express port 1, where is your GPU, then another 4 PCI Express lines leads into PCI Express port 2, where you can put second GPU, and then the remaining 4 are used to directly connect NVMe drive. Now, as we've discussed that, then you can see that the CPU itself is connected only through 4 PCI Express lines into the chipset, which means if you put into the motherboard all 4 NVMe drives, then realistically, if you want to use them at the maximum speed, then you can use only 2 at the same time, because one NVMe drive is directly connected into the CPU and another one would be connected to the chipset, but the chipset and CPU is connected just through 4 PCI Express lines. So even though you have 4 of them, and when you play with AI you quickly learn that you need a lot of space to store your models, but if you are after the fastest loading of the models possible, then your GPUs are directly connected into your CPU, and then one NVMe drive, ideally on this NVMe drive which is connected directly to CPU, you have your operating system, because if operating system lags, then everything else also lags. And then if you at the same time obviously running operating system, and then for example from another NVMe drive you are loading model, that's the optimal setup that you can have with this chipset. And that's also the reason why I selected Ryzen, because in consumer grade it has the maximum amount of available PCI Express lines that you can use. And as a bonus on this 6070E is PCI Express version 5 16 times, into which you can later connect, for example, Blackwell, but we will talk about it a little later. And as I mentioned, it has only the majority of consumer grade CPUs have only 2-channel driver for DDR memory. Let's check it. Where is it? Here, memory channels 2. And that's the reason why I opted to select for only 2 modules with the maximum capacity. So in case of DDR5 memory, I opted for Corsair Dominator Titanium, and I selected the 96 GB kit, which is 248 GB, and I opted for the maximum speed, which is 6600 operations per second. And currently on my X670E with BIOS 1G1, I'm able to actually overclock the Ryzen. In case of Ryzen, I just selected preset, MSI preset for Enhance Boost 3, which is moving the voltage frequency curve a little more up. And I was also able to actually overclock the memory to run on 6600. So if I just bring here and zoom in a little, so let me just zoom in a little, and if I show you how it looks like, so if we go into memory, we can see that it's really running on 6600 operations per second, so it's overclocked. Good. So now let's zoom out. Now the memory, the big enough memory and fast enough memory is super important when you want to play with AI models, because many times the consumer grade GPUs, they simply don't have enough memory, or you want to speed up loading or cache loading using your NVMe drives and your memory, and so you need the sufficient size, but you also need this memory to be fast enough. And it's definitely a big difference, like 20, 30, maybe 40% if you run it into stock clock speed, or if you overclock it into 6600. Now from the GPU point of view, I'm using RTX 5090 Suprim. The reason why I'm using the Suprim version is because it's water cooled, And the PCB, it is simply the superior PCB design, so you can overclock it and actually squeeze out of this amazing GPU as much as possible. So if I now start MSI Afterburner, and if we just bring it here and zoom in, then this is a way how I overclocked it. So in case of Suprim, you can unlock the 4 extra % of power limit, which means then it really draws 600 watts. So it's super important to have high quality cables and sufficient PSU. And then what I did, I actually overclocked it in a way that I took 975 millivolts and I moved this point and the wall frequency voltage curve up to 3000 megahertz, which is quite a lot, but this card is able to handle it. Then if you load into MSI Afterburner the new database, then it will allow you to overclock the memory plus 3000 megahertz. Normally it will allow just 2000, but if you load the new database, it will allow 3000. And then when you actually put all these things together, then what it will allow you to do, if I just open the test results, so let me just find it. No, I don't have it here. But after that I was able to reach inside the 3D Mark. Let me find it. Let me find it so that you see. So let's open this one and let me just move it here and I'll find it for you. So if we go here and if we find the results, then the results are here. So let's put it back. So as you can see, in 3D Mark still Nomad, I was able to actually, after overclocking, achieve 15,313 points. The average is 1000 lower, the best is 17,000, but it's like highly overclocked and just consumer grade with my limited knowledge how to do it. I think it's pretty good result on a PC that I have. So we have memory, we have GPU, then the second GPU that I have is previous generation 4060 Titanium 16 gigs, and I'm also planning to buy another 5060 Titanium so that in total I will have 64 gigs of VRAM, but it's preferable if you can do it to have single GPU with the biggest amount of VRAM available. And honestly, the 5090 is really beast, and especially in case of AI, you can generate video in just 2-3 minutes with one 2.2. Now, of course, you have to actually feed all this hardware, which takes a lot of power. So you have to have high quality PSU. These can get pretty quickly expensive. So in my case, I have 1300 watts. And with all these 3 GPUs, which means 5090, 4060 Titanium and 5060 Titanium, I'll be close to the limit of the PSU. So if you, for example, want to use 2 times 5090, you would probably want to look for something like 1700 watts or something similar. Keep also in mind that the PSU has some efficiency, and for example in this case it's just 90%. So it's not that it's able to give you 1300 watts continuously, but in reality it's like 1200, maybe 1250 continuously power draw. That's also very important to understand, and based on that design the PSU. And then because all the AI models are ridiculously huge and you also need transfer the huge amount of data into your RAM or VRAM, ideally you want to buy at least PCI Express 4 NVMe drives. I mean, PCI Express 4 is more than enough, but they should be big enough. So in my case I opted to buy 4 2 terabyte NVMe drives, and as I mentioned, ideally you want to use only 2 at the same time to achieve the highest speed. So if you have proper GPU, proper RAM and proper storage, which is for example this NVMe, then you can play comfortable with many AI models and the loading times would be reasonable. Otherwise you can wait for ages. So I would call this Pursman AI station, even though that the name probably sounds a little ridiculous because all these components are ridiculously expensive. On the other hand, if you realize how much cost some, let's say, enterprise grade GPUs, like for example RTX 6000, then it can easily cost like 10,000 USD, and if you compare it with the price of 5090 or for example 5060 titanium, then these prices are simply not comparable. So from that point of view, this is really Pursman AI station. And obviously think before buying two 5090s, because if you are using the AI every single day, then it probably makes sense. But otherwise, one is more than enough. And then if you just pair it with cheaper 4060 or 5060, that will help you render video, or you can offload some models onto it, and it will serve you more than well. And with that said, now you know on which hardware we are going to run all these flows or workflows. And with that said, there is only last thing left for me to do, and that's to wish you the most amazing day that you can have. Bye for now.